that the horrors of what has happened in America to African Americans for the past 4 centuries and projected their racist residue into the most recent half-century can't be blamed on America's urban schools. Still, God knows I've laid plenty of partial blame on them in 1,000 newspaper columns and many a radio and TV show throughout decades past. One of these reasons is because I hate to see the classism that has been pervasive in the Detroit public schools. Not racism, because it's black folks, in charge. But they weren't taking care of my kids at Finney. Oh no, indeed. Helen heard me talking to this board many a time about that. I said to the board, board, my kids, public school kids. I did it, and Al Ward didn't do it, because I didn't want Al Ward to do it, because I didn't want him to get fired. Because it was very dangerous to do some of this stuff. I was kind of protected. Obama to the American presidency is a landmark victory for racial and social justice. A whole lot of statewide and nationwide egalitarian activism still remains to be activated, particularly as that activism relates to black and brown children's desperate and as yet unmet need to become adequately educated. I suspect that a few of you upstanding Detroiters and Michiganders, and I'm not talking to you guys because I'm singing to the choir I know here, but I suspect that a few of you upstanding Detroiters and Michiganders, and indeed some of you Americans who dwell beyond the state of Michigan, might be tempted to ask, and you are certainly entitled to ask, the following questions. Whatever in the world could possibly qualify this old John Telford dude to make such sweepingly damning statements about our city and our state, and even about our country's good old banks and Wall Street bailings out corporate collusive political leaders, and still expect to be taken seriously? Can't that old renegade Telford see or know or realize or understand any of that at all? Mind molesters indeed. That dumb Telford has absolutely no qualification to say any of this anyway, or to make all of those other far left-wing pronouncements he's always foisting on us. The old reprobate renegade has just got to be crazy. Well, yes, the old reprobate renegade respectfully submits that the racial injustices in our city, state, and nation have been more than enough over time to drive all truly just men and women just a little crazy. Regardless of their racial heritage. I have lived as an urban student and worked as an urban and suburban, and again urban educator, and again suburban, for a lifetime. And I will share with you the totality of that long and enlightening run that has gradually and painstakingly qualified me to say the things I am about to say about the problems involving racial and social justice in Detroit, in Michigan, and the rest of America, in the chapters to come. I will also offer solutions to those problems. John Powell, my Southeastern High School student and runner, and later the ACLU's National Legal Director, who wrote the eloquent introduction to this tumultuous tome, proclaimed in a book he edited with Gavin Kearney and Vina Kay entitled In Pursuit of a Dream Deferred, Peter Lang Publishing, Incorporated, New York, 2001. America cannot afford to maintain two societies, white and minority, separated by race, class, and space. Nor can it afford to waste the potential of any of our children simply because they live in the forgotten parts of our urban centers. None of us can afford to turn our backs on the lawful imperative of Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, it's a long time ago. We must understand Brown to require the integration of two societies into one, not by assimilating one into the other, but by breaking down the barriers that prevent the two from enriching one another. Alfred, get ready, so we can call me up here in a couple minutes. Yet racist white Americans continue to resist and reject that lawful imperative. Despite the landmark election of non-white Barack Obama to the presidency of the United States by non-white America, with the overwhelming backing of non-racist white Americans, the racist part of white America's rank underbelly and descending intestine remains, spewing its excreta on black Americans. You see it happening right now, all over the country. It was predictable. so too does the well-fed overbelly of bourgeois classist black America likewise reject its economically lower-class black brothers and sisters and eject its excretory offal upon them. If I've aroused your righteous outrage sufficiently for you to turn the page, chapter 1, you will learn how and why I began to care so deeply about the plight of black Americans. And I will try to answer your question regarding my qualifications to make my, quote, sweepingly damning statements. In later chapters, I will offer you ample verification not only for and of these statements, but also for my pronouncements to come regarding the egregious undereducation of Detroit's, Michigan's, and America's African-American youth that remains the case today to the socio-economic detriment of all Americans. I will also offer some surprisingly simple remedies for these deeply ingrained and historic inequities that continue to endanger our democracy. I challenge you to race beside me on tracks in America, in Europe, and through the meanest streets of inner Detroit, down an unforgiving but exhilarating road where for 3/4 of a century I ran and fought again, like an animal that runs and fights every day and night of its life. That road is peopled with villains and heroes, some black and some white. Along the way, it's dotted with school districts and schools, some nearly all black and some nearly all white, some relatively affluent, and many crushingly impoverished. Regardless of their social and economic circumstances, the students in these schools and school districts all want in some way what most of the black students want but haven't got are healthy mental and physical growth, peace with justice, and real loving fathers in their homes. Whether you are black or white, if you have read this far, I know you're daring and caring enough to come now and run me down my hard but exciting road that began so long ago it seemingly had barely begun before it now has neared its end. I promise that when you come and run with me, you'll never think or act in your same old and tired way again. We're on our marks, we're set, bang! The celestial starter has set us off and running. And chapter 1 is 16th Street, and the quote is, "The deadliest of all possible sins is the mutilation of a child's spirit." Eric Erickson said that 50 years ago. And my first line is, "To begin, I came up on Detroit 16th Street at McGraw." Now, no one could ever mistake the corner of Detroit 16th Street at McGraw for your typical super suburban crossing, such as, for example, Squirrel Road at University Drive, or Long Lake Road at Cranbrook Road, or even Jefferson Avenue, Fisher Road. Obviously, Rochester Hills isn't Detroit, and the bountiful Bloomfields aren't either, nor certainly are there grossly affluent Grosse Points. Far from it. Despite their geographic proximity to once mighty Motown, from a socioeconomic perspective, Rochester Hills and the Bloomfields and Grosse Points might as well be on Uranus. Could be a pun there, too. This was certainly the case for most of the region in the 1940s, and it remains even more the case for almost all the region today. By the late 1940s, the only white kids left in my K-8 elementary school, Esterbrook, a grimy, grim 19th century edifice at Linwood and McGraw in west central Detroit, were poor southern migrants, or even poorer immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, Italy, Eastern Europe, and the Scandinavian countries. They also included the children of a few lower-class, die-hard Rooseveltian Democrats like my 4 naturalized American grandparents, and like my mother, Helen, who spoke only Danish till she was 5 and who had also attended Esterbrook, like my father, John Scotty Telford, a Scotland-born ex-coal miner and prize fighter, who at 5'8" and 158 pounds had been UAW President Walter Reuther's smallest and toughest bodyguard. I'm going to continue. That's a promise, not a threat. But first, I would like to do 2 things. I would like to introduce, would you stand up, Robert? I would like to introduce a fine sculptor who has a bust behind me that he created. This is Robert Landry. He was a teacher in Royal Oak Schools. He's done an awful lot of things. Among them, he had one of his creations at ground zero. He's just got incredible work, and this is just one up here. The next thing I'm going to do is ask Alfred G. Harris to come up to the mic. Alfred is a budding poet who has some books up here that I would like you to take a look at after my speaking is over this evening, because he is a fine young poet who hasn't been celebrated as much as he should be. So I invited him to be part of my presentation tonight, and Alfred is going to read a poem now.
Thank you, Dr. Telford. I do want to take a moment to say thank you for the opportunity to speak with your audience. And I do have a special place in my heart for teachers. My mother is a retired school teacher. She retired from Flint Public Schools, and then she moved out to Vegas and she started teaching there full time. So I do have a special place in my heart for teachers and anyone who dedicates their lives to raising other people's kids. Dr. Telford asked me to read one poem, and he did ask me to be brief, so I will be brief.
Unlike me.
The poem I selected to read is called Education Is. I wrote this back in 2007. It's from my book called Radical Passions. It's a self-published poetry book that I put out early in 2009. Education is personal, understood and accepted by our spirit being, the bringing of light to our life steps. Education is universal, with an infinity of interdisciplinary subjects, with an infinity for disciplined study. Education is sometimes academic, for the sake of organization and generalized understandings, in order to research, theorize, and debate our undertaking, selecting our fields of choice and digging in. Education is enlightening, pushing the envelopes of human possibilities. Mastering a discipline adds value to our brethren. Education is freedom, finally free from historic manipulation. A private liberty is in and of the information. Education is a lifeline, linking the knowledge and spirits of ancestors past with our presence. Our present walks through the personal transgressions, eternally grateful for these lessons, these multidimensional blessings. Education is forever. Thank you, Dr. Telford.
He's got a lot of poetry that rivals the poetry that he just read. And I hope he'll come up and take a look at some more of his work. I'm going to have to skip through a lot of this book, obviously. There are things that I would love to share with you that I hope you will read. Maybe if you come to my next reading, I'll read a different part. But I can't cover a lot of the things that I really would like to share with you. I'm skipping to chapter 7. Also, you know what? I'm going to take a water before I discreetly neglected to say, I'm taking you back now to 1956. No, right now 1956, but that was 1958. And as I have emphasized, and will emphasize again, this book's major focus isn't track and athletics. I want you to know that, even though there's a picture of me taking a start in Milan, Italy, it's really not about running, as John Paul said in the introduction. Its major focus is my lifelong crusade to seek and safeguard social justice. Nonetheless, in order to make manifest much of what helped shape my personal perspectives, that led me to launch that lifelong crusade. And this is, of course, aside from what I learned from my father and grandfather, who were civil rights activists before there ever was such a word. I must share 3 enlightening racialized incidents I experienced that were relevant to my running. These 3 enlightening incidents involved my 10 black teammates on 4 relay teams. The first 2 at Wayne State, the third on the United States national team, and the 4th with the Detroit Track Club. The Detroit Track Club, that organization, many of those runners in the Detroit Track Club are now part of this organization, the Detroit Track Old Timers, which Colonel Aaron Gordon and I founded in 1992. And we're going to be having our 19th annual awards dinner at Barth Hall in the Cathedral Church of St. Paul on June the 25th. It's a Friday, June the 25th, in the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, the 19th annual awards dinner of the Detroit Track and Field Old Timers. In 1956, I and my 4 black teammates, including my later to become lifelong friend and confidant Cliff Hatcher, drove with our coach from Detroit to Philadelphia nonstop and won the prestigious Penn Relays mile relay title for Wayne State in a huge upset, beating 48 college class teams in what was hyperbolically advertised as the College Championship of America. On our victorious return trip, I skipped a lot because I was talking about my runners and my teammates, telling you a little bit about them, but it's in here. On our victorious return trip from the historic Penn Relays, Coach David L. Holmes, who on such excursions was usually only able to dole out enough money for hamburgers or hot dogs for each of us from WSU's tight track budget, took us to a fancy restaurant on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, intending to do it out of his own pocket. He was going to buy us steak dinners to celebrate our victory. With our empty stomachs rumbling and our mouths veritably watering in hungry anticipation, we sat, and we sat, and we sat in that restaurant for what seemed like hours without being served. Finally, divining what was happening and tiring of being ignored by the racially discriminatory management and waiters, and this was not down south, it was on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, Coach Holmes took us back to the car. After driving many more miles into the night, we stopped at a still open diner in a little town in Ohio, where a short order cook in a tobacco-stained apron got the rare privilege of feeding greasy hamburgers to WSU's 4 newly crowned college 1-mile relay champions of America and their bullet-fast 880-yard relay teammate. We actually took 2 relay teams down there, but one was an alternate, Billy Smith. I observed this cook to pick his nose just before he served us our Cokes with his thumbs in the glasses. But he probably meant no offense. It was apparently just his habit. Also being extremely thirsty, I rationalized to myself that after all it had not been with his thumb, but rather with his forefinger that he had dug in his nose so deeply. I gulped down the entire Coke and courageously ordered another, with the hope that this time the cook might hold his thumb just a little higher in the glass. The second incident, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it had to do with Ira Murchison, the world record holder in the 100 meters, who was my relay teammate on the 4x1, and the fastest runner in history, at that point, for 100 meters on the dirt track, or at 10-1, 100 meters. I was getting awful tired, because the AAU was running us really hard. And I had won all my races, but they were getting closer and closer and closer because we kept running fresh opponents as we flew from country to country, and every opponent we ran was the champion of that country. So I can remember I lost a lot of weight, and I was just about ready, I was afraid to lose a race. And they told the sprinters that if we lost the race, they'd send us home. you know, so we couldn't lose. It was against the rules. So Ira was picking up my suitcase for me, which was heavily laden with, you know, trophies and medals and stuff. It was heavy. And I said, I'm ready to go home. He said, I'm not. He said, you know, we're getting treated like kings over here. You know, there were some, you know, real interesting ladies also who were, you know, showing us a lot of attention, signing autographs and all that good stuff. And he said, I'm ready to go home. And I never want to go home. You know, I'm going to be going back home, and I'm going to be, you know, cleaning the latrines at Western Michigan University for my half track scholarship. He had a half track scholarship. Had the 100 meters. Said it when he was in the Army. And some of my opponents, I ran against one guy named Ardalian Ignatiev, you know, who was the Russian champion, I think the Soviet Union champion. I think he had been also the European champion. And he had a villa on the Black Sea in the rank of colonel. He was 23 years old. You know, I said, there's something that just didn't quite balance here, you know. And the third incident was an incident when the Detroit Athletic Club offered me, they offered to sponsor me. They offered to pay my way to the Eastern Invitational meets in Boston and Philadelphia and New York. And I told them I would love that, you know, because, you know, I was a struggling young teacher. I didn't, it was 1958, I didn't have any money. I said, but you know, I come as a package. You know, Pete Petros, later became principal of Mumford. Jim Bibbs, who had tied Jesse Owens' world 60-yard record, and was track coach at Michigan State later. And Billy Smith, who held the world record in the 65-yard hurdles. That was my relay team.